Welcome, everyone. We're diving deep into mental models today
Yeah, these powerful thinking
to
tools.
help us make better decisions.
Exactly. Become better problem solvers.
Not just some,
Yeah.
like abstract theories, right?
Right. These are practical concepts you can actually use every day.
Okay, so to guide us on this deep dive, we have the work of Shane Parrish
And his book, The Great Mental Models.
from Farnham Street Media.
You know, Parrish, he started this whole project after working in intelligence.
For 9/11.
Yeah. He realized he needed a better way to make sense of, really complex situations.
And he found that in mental models.
Yeah. Which were championed by his mentor.
The legendary investor Charlie Munger. So,
We're about to unpack some seriously useful knowledge.
all right, let's get into it.
Yeah.
So what are mental models at their core?
Well, they're just simplified representations of how things work.
Yep, okay.
You know, imagine you're in a new city and you have a map.
Okay.
That map isn't a perfect representation of the city, right?
It doesn't have every little detail
Exactly, but it gives you enough information to find your way around.
and not get lost.
Yeah, and that's what mental models do for us.
So they're like maps for our minds.
Exactly, helping us navigate all the complexities of life.
I like that.
The quality of our thinking and ultimately our decisions really depends on the quality of our mental models.
That makes sense.
Parrish explores a whole range of models, drawing from,
Oh, from all sorts of fields.
like physics, biology, psychology,
He categorizes them into these different groups, like understanding reality.
thinking about systems, and making decisions.
But for this deep dive, we're focusing on like general thinking concepts that are applicable to almost any situation.
Right.
Okay, so we're getting like a toolkit
Yeah.
of mental models that can help us see the world, I don't know, more objectively.
Think more critically for sure and solve problems more effectively.
I'm so ready for this.
Great. Let's start with the circle of competence.
Okay.
Imagine you're in a small town. There's a lifer there. Who knows? Like everything about that town.
Every street, every family.
Exactly. Every bit of gossip.
They just like have this deep knowledge.
Deep, intimate knowledge.
Okay.
And then there's a stranger who just arrived,
Okay.
the lifer. They represent someone operating within their circle of competence,
Oh,
the area where they have genuine expertise. Right.
So the stranger is obviously outside of theirs.
Right.
So each of us, we have our own circles of competence.
Yeah. Areas where, we know a lot and areas where we're clueless.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's just as important to know what's inside your circle as it is to know what's outside of it.
To know your limitations.
Right. Being honest about those limitations.
So crucial for making good decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
But how does all this apply to me? Like in my everyday life?
Well, think of it this way. You wouldn't try to climb Mount Everest without, relying on the knowledge of,
Experienced Sherpa guides.
Yes. Because climbing Mount Everest, it's clearly outside most people's circles of competence.
I would never. That's insane.
Right. Exactly.
But even within our own, professions
Right.
or areas where we consider ourselves experts, there are always going to be things we just don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
So the key is
Be aware of those boundaries.
be willing to learn.
Be willing to adapt.
Okay. I like that. So how do we build our circles of competence?
Yeah.
Is it all about just years of study?
And practice.
Yeah.
Well, that's definitely part of it. We
Right.
have to constantly be learning and, experimenting.
Seeking feedback.
Seeking feedback, right. But it's also about being honest with yourself.
About successes.
And failures.
Yeah.
Keep track of your decisions and, their outcomes.
What worked? What didn't work?
Exactly. What can you learn from those experiences?
That makes me think about journaling or keeping a decision log.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Being able to look back at your track record.
Yeah, super valuable.
Okay, so what if we find ourselves operating outside of our circle of competence?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, we can't be experts in everything.
Right. And that's where things can get, a little tricky.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Don't jump in blindly.
Do your research.
Do your research. Talk to people who have experience in that area.
Try to learn at least the basics.
At least the basics. And then try to find someone whose circle of competence in that area is strong.
Like a mentor.
A mentor, yeah. A trusted advisor.
Someone to guide you.
Someone to guide you and help you make better decisions.
This is where having a strong network is so valuable.
Exactly, because then you can tap into the expertise of those people that you trust.
Okay, so even if we don't have all the answers,
Yeah,
these models can still guide our thinking.
absolutely.
Okay, I like that. So what's the next mental model we're going to unpack?
Let's talk about first principles thinking.
Okay.
It's all about getting to the fundamental truths of a situation.
By stripping away
Assumptions.
Questioning conventional wisdom.
Yeah. Challenging the status quo, not just accepting things as they are.
Okay, and there's an example in the book about Temple Grandin and the animal scientist.
Right. She was tasked with designing more humane cattle handling facilities.
Yeah. Instead of just accepting, like, the existing designs,
Right.
she used first principles thinking to basically revolutionize the whole industry.
She did.
Are you talking about those curved cattle chutes?
Yes.
I remember reading about those. That's incredible. So she used the animal's natural instincts to guide them, rather than forcing them into, like, stressful situations.
Exactly.
That's brilliant. So first principles thinking, it's really about breaking down a problem to its core elements.
Yes.
And rebuilding from there.
You got it. Now, let's shift gears and talk about second-order thinking.
Okay.
So, while first-order thinking is about considering the immediate consequences of your actions,
Okay.
second-order thinking takes it a step further.
So it's about thinking several steps ahead, right?
Right.
Anticipating those ripple effects.
The unintended consequences of our actions?
Yeah. Because they can be way more significant than the intended ones.
Much more.
I see where this is going.
Let me give you an example. During British rule in India, the government offered a reward for every dead cobra.
To reduce the population.
Yeah. Seems logical, right? Get rid of the cobras, problem solved.
Exactly.
But here's what happened. People realized they could breed cobras.
And then turn them in for the reward.
Exactly. So the cobra population actually increased because of this policy.
Oh, wow. So they created a new problem trying to solve the original one?
Exactly. It's a classic example of what's called the cobra effect.
Okay, I'm never forgetting that.
They didn't think through those second-order effects.
And that's why second-order thinking is so important.
So important.
It makes you think about the whole system, not just your little piece of it.
Right. Another example is the overuse of antibiotics in livestock.
Okay.
The first-order consequence is faster growth and more profit for farmers, right?
Makes sense.
But the second-order consequence,
What is it?
the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Oh, wow.
A huge threat to human health.
So a decision that seems beneficial in the short term can actually have devastating consequences in the long run.
Exactly. Second-order thinking is about thinking beyond your own immediate self-interest,
And considering the broader impact,
the broader impact of your actions.
it helps build trust, stronger relationships.
Absolutely.
Because if you're constantly cutting corners or taking advantage of people, you're going to damage your reputation.
We will. Okay, let's talk about probabilistic thinking now.
Okay, probabilistic thinking. Sounds a little bit mathy.
It is to some extent, yeah.
Okay.
But the essence of it is you're just trying to estimate the likelihood of different outcomes.
Recognizing that the future is uncertain.
Yeah, and that we can make better decisions by understanding, like, the odds.
That makes sense. Because
Yeah.
we can't predict everything with 100% certainty.
Right. Think about a seasoned poker player.
Okay.
They might not be able to calculate the exact odds of winning every hand.
Right.
But they have a good sense of the probabilities based on, their experience.
They've developed this, like, gut feeling about the odds.
Exactly. And probabilistic thinking is all about developing that intuition.
Recognizing that there's this range of possible outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
each with a certain probability.
Yes. It's recognizing that there's a range of possible outcomes, each with a certain probability.
So instead of thinking in black and white, we're thinking in shades of gray.
Precisely. Now, let's talk about one specific technique within probabilistic thinking.
Okay.
It's called Bayesian thinking.
Bayesian thinking. Okay. Tell me more.
It's all about updating your beliefs as you encounter new information.
Right.
Think of a doctor diagnosing a patient, right?
Okay.
They might start with a hypothesis based on the patient's symptoms,
Sure.
but they'll constantly be updating that hypothesis as they gather more information.
From tests in the patient's history.
Exactly. They're not just stuck on their initial diagnosis, you see.
They adjust their thinking as the evidence comes in.
Exactly. That's the essence of Bayesian thinking. Being open to new information and, changing your mind when the evidence warrants it.
Okay. What else do we need to know?
Well, let's talk about fat-tailed curves.
Fat-tailed curves. Okay. I'm intrigued.
A fat-tailed curve is a probability distribution where extreme events are more likely than you'd expect based on a normal bell curve.
Like black swan events.
Exactly. Rare, unpredictable things, but with a massive impact.
Like the 2008 financial crisis.
Yeah, those risk models didn't account for those fat tails.
Those extreme events that were more likely than they realized.
Right. That's why it's so important to be aware of fat-tailed curves.
They remind us that we can't predict everything.
And we need to be prepared for the unexpected.
A great reminder to stay humble and avoid overconfidence.
It is.
Okay, let's add another tool to our mental model toolbox. What's next?
Let's talk about inversion.
All right, inversion. I'm ready to flip my thinking upside down.
Good. Instead of asking, how do I achieve this goal? You ask, how could I prevent this goal from being achieved?
Interesting. So you're basically looking at the problem in reverse.
Exactly. It forces you to consider obstacles, potential pitfalls that you might have missed otherwise.
Give me an example.
Let's go back to Edward Bernays, the PR genius.
The one who made smoking fashionable for women.
That's him. He did it by inverting the problem.
Remind me, how did he use inversion?
Instead of trying to, persuade women to smoke directly, he figured out what would need to change in society for women to want to smoke.
Okay.
He realized that cigarettes were seen as a symbol of male power, something that women at the time were largely excluded from.
So he reframed smoking as a form of rebellion.
Exactly. A way for women to challenge those societal norms.
And assert their independence.
He staged those famous Torches of Freedom marches.
Oh, right. Linking cigarettes to the women's suffrage movement.
Exactly. He even hired psychoanalysts to tell women that smoking was a way to, express their oral desires and satisfy their subconscious cravings.
Now, he didn't just change people's minds, he changed the entire environment.
He did.
To make his goal inevitable.
It's amazing how a shift in perspective can completely change the game, isn't it?
Okay, I'm officially in awe of Edward Bernays.
He was a master manipulator, that's for sure.
Give me another example. How else has inversion been used effectively?
Let's look at the world of investing. John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, used inversion to create index funds.
Okay, index funds. Now, I know they're supposed to be a good way to invest,
They are.
but I've never really understood why.
Okay, well, Bogle realized that most investors were losing money by trying to beat the market, picking individual stocks.
Or hiring those, like expensive fund managers.
Exactly, who claimed to have special insights.
Yeah.
So he inverted the problem. Instead of trying to outperform the market,
Which is incredibly difficult to do consistently.
oh yeah, incredibly difficult. So he asked, how can we help investors avoid losing money?
So instead of chasing risky high returns,
Yeah.
he focused on minimizing losses.
Exactly. He created index funds that simply track a specific market index, like the S&P 500.
Meaning, they're not picking winners and losers.
Right. The fund just buys all the stocks in the index.
So its performance mirrors the overall market.
Precisely. It's like saying, if you can't beat the market, just be the market.
I love that.
And by eliminating those expensive fund managers, minimizing trading costs.
Index funds can offer lower fees.
Yeah,
Which translates into higher returns for investors over the long term.
exactly. It was a win-win.
Okay, I'm sold on index funds. Bogle's inversion strategy was brilliant.
It was. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective.
It makes me think about the power of doing less.
Yeah.
Sometimes inaction is the best action.
That's a great insight. It actually connects to another mental model we'll explore later.
Oh,
The power of defaults.
okay. I can't wait to dive into that one. But for now, let's stick with inversion.
Okay.
Are there any other fascinating examples you can share?
Well, let's revisit Florence Nightingale.
Ah, yes. The pioneering nurse.
She inverted the problem of treating sick soldiers.
By focusing on preventing illness in the first place.
Exactly.
And she was so brilliant in the way she used data and statistics to drive her decision-making.
Oh, absolutely. She was a pioneer in using data visualization.
To show the importance of sanitation and hygiene.
Right. Her famous coxcomb charts.
The ones that show the dramatic decrease in deaths after she implemented her reforms.
Yes. Those charts were incredibly effective.
So she didn't just have the right ideas, she knew how to present them so people could understand and act.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of combining these mental models. Inversion helped her identify the right solution, but her understanding of statistics allowed her to communicate its effectiveness.
And make a lasting impact.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how these mental models can be used together, like pieces of a puzzle.
They can. They create a more complete picture of the world.
And the more models we have in our mental toolbox.
The better equipped we'll be to navigate the complexities of life.
And make better decisions.
Precisely.
Okay, let's add another tool to that toolbox. What's the next mental model?
Let's talk about a model that's all about understanding cause and effect.
Okay.
The distinction between correlation and causation.
Correlation versus causation. I know this is important,
It is.
but I always get a bit fuzzy on the details.
All right. Well, correlation just means that two things tend to happen together.
Okay.
For example, ice cream sales and crime rates both tend to increase during the summer months.
Right, so there's a correlation there.
Uh-huh.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that eating ice cream causes crime.
Exactly. That's where causation comes in.
Okay.
Causation means that one thing actually causes another thing to happen.
Right.
And it's crucial to distinguish between the two.
Because mistaking correlation for causation can lead to all sorts of problems.
Faulty assumptions.
Bad decisions.
Bad decisions, for sure.
I can see how that would be dangerous.
Let me give you an example. Imagine a study shows a correlation between owning a pet and having lower stress levels. Now, does owning a pet actually cause stress reduction? It's possible, but there could be other factors, right?
Maybe people who are already less stressed are more likely to adopt pets.
Exactly. Or maybe having a pet just encourages you to get out more and exercise.
Okay.
Maybe exercise is the thing reducing your stress.
Yeah, so it's like a tangled web. Hard to know what's causing what.
Right. That's why it's important to be cautious when interpreting correlations.
Okay.
We need other evidence to determine if there's a true causal relationship.
It's like those clickbait headlines you see all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, study shows eating chocolate makes you smarter.
There might be a correlation, but it doesn't mean it's cause and effect.
Exactly. Okay, so this is a good reminder to be skeptical.
Yes.
And not just jump to conclusions.
Now, this brings us to another important concept. Regression to the mean.
Okay, regression to the mean.
It's a statistical concept.
Right.
And it can easily trick us into mistaking correlation for causation.
So what is it?
It basically means that extreme events tend to be followed by more average events.
So if you have a really great day, it's likely that your next day will be a bit more ordinary.
Exactly.
The same goes for negative events, right?
Right. If you have a particularly bad day, your next day will probably be a bit better.
Okay.
The problem is we often misinterpret this natural regression to the mean as evidence of causation.
You mean an example?
If a company is experiencing, let's say, a slump in sales and then implements a new marketing strategy,
Okay.
and then their sales go up the next quarter.
They might assume the new strategy caused the increase.
Right. But it's also possible that sales were just regressing back to the mean.
So it might not have had anything to do with that strategy at all.
Right. That's why it's so important to be aware of this concept of regression to the mean.
We have to be careful about attributing changes to specific interventions.
When those changes might just be part of a natural cycle.
Right. This is a great reminder to really look at the bigger picture. Consider all the possible explanations before assuming cause and effect.
Exactly. Now let's talk about a mental model that's particularly relevant when we have limited information.
Okay.
When we need to make decisions under uncertainty. Probabilistic thinking.
Probabilistic thinking. Didn't we already touch on this a bit earlier?
We did when we talked about Bayesian thinking.
Right.
But probabilistic thinking is like a broader framework for making decisions under uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that the future is not predetermined.
And that there's a range of possible outcomes, each with a certain probability.
Exactly.
So instead of trying to predict the future with 100% certainty,
Which is impossible, by the way.
we're thinking about the likelihood of different things happening.
Precisely. It's about understanding the odds and making calculated bets.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about the insurance industry.
Okay.
Insurance companies use probabilistic thinking all the time.
To assess risk?
Yes. To set premiums.
They're not guaranteeing that something will or won't happen, are they?
No.
They're estimating the probability.
Exactly. Based on the available information.
And then they use those probabilities to calculate premiums.
That'll cover their costs and allow them to make a profit.
And of course, they can't predict exactly who will have an accident or get sick.
Right. But they can use probabilistic thinking to manage risk.
This makes me realize that we're all using probabilistic thinking all the time.
We are.
Even if we don't realize it.
Yeah.
Like when we decide whether to take an umbrella when we leave the house.
You're estimating the probability of rain.
Exactly. So the better we get at understanding these probabilities,
The better decisions we can make.
about everything, our finances, our health, everything.
It's like a superpower.
It really is. And it's a skill that anyone can develop with practice, right?
Right.
Okay, so how do we get better at thinking probabilistically? What are some things we need to understand?
Well, we already talked about Bayesian thinking.
Right. Updating our beliefs as we get new information.
Exactly. But another key concept is understanding different types of probability distributions.
Okay. Probability distribution.
You know those bell curves and graphs you see?
Yeah. I've never really understood what they mean.
Okay, well, a probability distribution simply shows the likelihood of different outcomes for an event.
Okay.
And the most common one is the normal distribution, or the bell curve.
Right, the bell curve. So that represents a sort of average.
Exactly. In a normal distribution, the most likely outcomes are all clustered around the average.
Okay.
And the less likely outcomes sort of tail off on either side.
I see.
Think about human height.
Okay.
Most people are clustered around the average height.
Right.
There are fewer people who are very tall or very short.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those fat-tailed curves we were talking about earlier?
Ah, yes. Fat-tailed curves.
Those are different, right?
They are. Fat-tailed curves are where extreme events are more likely than you'd expect based on a normal distribution.
So it's like the bell curve got stretched out at the edges.
Exactly.
And those can really mess with our predictions.
Oh, yeah, they can.
Where do we see fat-tailed curves in the real world?
Well, financial markets, stock market crashes, for example.
Okay.
They're much more common than you'd expect based on a normal distribution.
And those traditional risk models,
They often fail.
because they were based on this assumption of a normal distribution,
Right, but in reality, the market follows a fat-tailed distribution.
making those crashes more likely.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to be aware of the type of distribution you're dealing with.
Okay, so fat-tailed curves are basically lurking everywhere,
They can be.
just waiting to disrupt our best-laid plans.
It's not about living in fear, but it's good to be prepared.
So how do we deal with them? How do we make good decisions when extreme events are more likely than we think?
One approach is to focus on robustness rather than optimization.
Robustness versus optimization,
Yeah, when we optimize, we're trying to get the best possible outcome.
based on like our current understanding of things.
Yeah, but when we focus on robustness, we're trying to create systems that can withstand a much wider range of outcomes.
Including those outliers, those unexpected events.
Exactly, like building a house that can withstand a hurricane.
Okay,
Even though hurricanes are, relatively rare.
so we're not just talking about physical structures, right?
Right. We can build robustness into our organizations, our relationships, our financial plans.
Our own like mental and emotional well-being.
Exactly.
So it's all about resilience.
Resilience is a key component of robustness.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Being able to bounce back from unexpected challenges.
Exactly. And it's a skill we can all cultivate through practice and by embracing these mental models.
This is so empowering. Like we're arming ourselves with the tools to navigate this crazy, complex world.
The more models we have in our toolbox, the better equipped we'll be.
I'm excited to see what other mental models we're going to explore.
Me too. Okay, so let's talk about a mental model that's really relevant these days.
In our like information-saturated world.
Yeah, it's called Occam's razor.
Occam's razor.
Okay.
I've definitely heard that one before.
Yeah.
I feel like it's something to do with simplicity.
You got it. It basically states that when you have competing explanations,
Okay.
the simplest one is more likely to be true.
So it's about like cutting through all the noise.
Yeah. With a mental razor. Don't overcomplicate things.
When a simple explanation works.
Exactly. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Imagine you hear a strange noise in your attic.
Okay.
Is it more likely to be a family of raccoons?
Or a poltergeist.
Exactly.
Definitely raccoons.
Right. Occam's razor would guide us to the explanation with the fewest assumptions.
Because raccoons, they're a known thing.
Right. But poltergeists, they require all these extra assumptions.
About, like, the nature of reality.
Exactly. It's not about completely ruling out that more complex explanation,
Right.
but recognizing that the simpler one is statistically more probable.
Right.
And this applies to, way more than just spooky noises.
Right. Give me another example.
Think about scientific discoveries, like the mystery of dark matter.
Okay, dark matter.
That's the stuff we can't see, but we know is there because of its gravitational effect.
Yeah, it's like holding the universe together.
Right. So astronomers observed that galaxies were rotating in a way that couldn't be explained by just the visible matter.
So, the simplest explanation.
There must be some unseen matter.
Dark matter.
Yeah, exerting this gravitational pull.
So instead of like throwing out our entire understanding of gravity,
Right.
they introduced the concept of dark matter to account for what they were seeing.
Exactly. And even though we haven't directly observed dark matter yet,
Right.
it's still the most parsimonious explanation we have.
Meaning it fits the available data without adding unnecessary complexity.
Right. And Occam's razor would suggest that it's like the most promising avenue for research.
So sometimes the most elegant solution is also the most likely.
Exactly.
Occam's razor is such a powerful tool.
It is.
Okay, speaking of avoiding unnecessary complexity,
Yeah.
there's another one. Hanlon's razor.
Yes. Hanlon's razor.
Another good one for cutting through all the noise.
It cuts through those misattributions of malice.
Oh.
Don't attribute to malice that which is more easily explained by stupidity.
Oh, right. So it's basically saying, don't assume everyone's out to get you.
Exactly.
Sometimes people just mess up.
They do. Think about it. how often have you gotten frustrated by something someone did, assuming they were trying to, like, annoy you?
Oh, all the time.
Right.
Only to find out it was an honest mistake.
An honest mistake. I'm sure we've all been there.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And that's where Hanlon's razor is really useful.
Yeah, it's a good reminder to consider, like, those less sinister explanations.
Before assuming bad intentions,
Right.
it helps us avoid unnecessary drama and conflict.
So instead of jumping to, they're doing this to spite me, we should first consider, maybe they just messed up.
Exactly. It's a much more charitable and often more accurate way to view the world.
It's definitely a more peaceful way to live.
Yeah. Now, of course, there are times when people do act out of malice.
Right.
But those instances are probably less common than we think.
It's all about giving people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, so this makes me think about how sometimes we really need to shift our perspective.
Yeah.
To understand a situation.
Okay.
Which brings us back to inversion, right?
Yes. Inversion is all about approaching a problem from the opposite direction.
Right. Instead of asking, how do I achieve this goal?
Yeah.
You ask,
how could I prevent this goal from being achieved?
So you're looking at it from the reverse angle.
Exactly. It can lead to more creative solutions.
Okay, so how's inversion been used in the real world?
Well, let's think back to Edward Bernays again.
The PR genius.
Remember how he made smoking fashionable for women?
Yeah.
He did it by inverting the problem.
Okay, remind me how.
Instead of trying to persuade women directly,
Yeah.
he figured out what would need to change in society for women to want to smoke. He realized that cigarettes were seen as this symbol of male power and freedom.
Something that women at the time were largely excluded from.
Exactly.
So he reframed smoking as this form of rebellion.
Yeah.
A way for women to challenge those societal norms.
And assert their independence.
Exactly.
He staged those Torches of Freedom marches, linking cigarettes to the women's suffrage movement.
It's amazing how a shift in perspective can completely change the game.
Isn't it?
Okay, give me another example. How else has inversion been used effectively?
Let's look at investing again. John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard.
Yeah.
He used inversion to create index funds.
Okay, index funds. I know they're a good way to invest, but
They are.
I've never understood why.
Okay, well, Bogle realized that most investors were losing money by trying to beat the market.
Picking individual stocks or...
hiring expensive fund managers.
Right, the ones who claim to have all the secret knowledge.
Exactly. So he inverted the problem. Instead of trying to outperform the market.
Which is incredibly difficult to do consistently.
Incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So he asked, how can we help investors avoid losing money?
So instead of chasing those big risky returns, he focused on minimizing losses.
Exactly. He created these index funds that simply track a specific market index, like the S&P 500.
So instead of trying to pick winners and losers,
yeah,
the fund just buys all the stocks in the index.
And that way, its performance just mirrors the overall market.
So if you can't beat the market, just be the market.
Precisely.
That's brilliant.
And by eliminating those expensive fund managers and minimizing trading costs, index funds can offer lower fees.
Which, over a long term,
yeah,
leads to higher returns for investors.
It's a win-win.
Okay, I'm sold on index funds.
Good.
Bogle's inversion strategy was amazing.
It really was. Sometimes those simplest solutions are the most effective.
It makes me think about the power of doing less.
Right.
Sometimes inaction is the best action.
I like that. That actually connects to another mental model we'll explore later.
Okay.
The power of defaults.
Can't wait. But for now, let's stick with inversion.
Okay.
Any other cool examples?
Well, let's think about Florence Nightingale again.
Oh, yeah. The nursing pioneer.
Yeah, she inverted the problem of treating sick soldiers.
By focusing on preventing illness in the first place.
Right.
But what's so fascinating is how she used data and statistics.
Yeah.
To back up her whole approach.
She was a pioneer in using data visualization.
Right. To communicate the importance of things like sanitation and hygiene.
Exactly. Her famous coxcomb charts.
Yeah. The ones that showed how dramatically deaths decreased after she implemented her reforms.
Those charts were super effective.
So she didn't just have the right ideas, she knew how to present them so that people would understand and actually take action.
That's so important, isn't it?
Yeah. It highlights how important it is to combine these different mental models.
It does.
So inversion helped her find the right solution.
But her understanding of statistics
Yeah.
allowed her to communicate its effectiveness and make a lasting impact.
It's like having a team of brilliant advisors in your head.
I love that analogy.
Each with their own unique perspective.
And the more mental models we have in that team, the better.
Speaking of which, let's add another team member. with a model that helps us distinguish between correlation and causation.
Ah, yes. Correlation versus causation.
I'd love to hear your take on it.
Okay, well, it's this common trap we fall into.
What is it?
Assuming that just because two things happen together,
Okay.
that one must be causing the other.
Right, but that's not always the case.
Not always.
It's like the classic example of ice cream sales and crime rates.
Both going up in the summer.
Just because they're correlated doesn't mean that one is causing the other.
Exactly. There might be a third factor at play.
Right, like the heat.
The heat, yeah, influencing both.
So correlation simply means there's a relationship between two things.
Right.
But causation means one thing directly causes the other.
And that distinction is crucial.
Yeah, for making good decisions. Okay, so how can we avoid falling into that trap of thinking that correlation equals causation?
One way is to look for a plausible mechanism.
A mechanism.
Yeah, that explains how one thing could cause the other.
Okay.
For example, if a study found a correlation between exercise and a lower risk of heart disease,
Okay.
we could then look at the biological mechanisms.
Right, how exercise actually strengthens the cardiovascular system.
Exactly.
So it's not enough to just observe a correlation.
Yeah.
We need to understand the underlying mechanisms.
To see if there's a real cause and effect relationship.
Okay, that makes sense.
Now, another important aspect of understanding cause and effect
Yeah.
is recognizing this phenomenon called regression to the mean.
Okay, regression to the mean. What's that?
It means that extreme events, they tend to be followed by more average events.
Okay.
So if you have a really good day, chances are your next day will be a little bit more ordinary.
Things tend to even out over time.
Exactly. And the same goes for bad days. So if you have a particularly bad day, it's likely that your next day will be a bit better.
I see.
The problem is we can misinterpret this natural regression as a causal effect.
Give me an example.
If a student gets an unusually high score on a test,
Okay.
and then their next score is lower,
Yeah.
we might assume that the lower score was caused by, overconfidence or lack of effort.
Right, but it could just be regression to the mean.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to be aware of this.
Okay, so how do we tell the difference between a real causal effect and just regression to the mean?
Well, controlled experiments can be helpful.
Okay.
If we randomly assign students to different study methods, and we see that one method consistently leads to better scores,
Yeah.
that's stronger evidence for a causal link.
Okay.
But of course, in real life, controlled experiments aren't always possible.
Right.
So we have to rely on other forms of evidence.
And really careful analysis.
Yeah.
This is all giving me a whole new perspective on how to interpret data and draw conclusions. It's so easy to jump to assumptions without considering all the factors at play.
It is. That's why these mental models are so valuable.
They really help us think more critically
They do.
and avoid those common pitfalls in our reasoning.
Okay, so we've talked about correlation versus causation and regression to the mean. What other mental models can help us in this uncertain world?
Yeah, what else can help us make better decisions?
Well, we've touched on probabilistic thinking before, but let's dive a little deeper.
I'm ready to get probabilistic.
Great. So it's all about embracing uncertainty, recognizing that we don't have perfect information.
Right.
Instead of trying to predict the future with 100% certainty, we focus on estimating the likelihood of different outcomes.
So it's about thinking in terms of probabilities rather than absolutes.
Exactly. And this can be a really powerful shift in mindset.
Okay.
It allows us to make better decisions, even in those complex and unpredictable situations.
Can you give me an example? How is this used in the real world?
Think about venture capitalists. They invest in tons of startups, knowing that most will fail.
Right.
But they use probabilistic thinking to assess the potential upside of each investment
Okay.
and to manage their overall risk.
So they're not trying to pick one sure winner.
Right. They're spreading their bets based on the probabilities of success.
It's about playing the odds.
Exactly. This allows them to handle a certain number of failures, but still be successful overall.
This is making me think about how probabilistic thinking could be applied to, our personal lives.
Absolutely.
Our careers, relationships.
It can be applied to all sorts of things.
Even just deciding what to have for dinner.
It's a super versatile mental model.
So how do we actually get better at this?
No.
At thinking probabilistically?
One key is to get comfortable with uncertainty.
Oh, that's easier said than done.
I know, right? But it can be really liberating.
Yeah.
Because it allows us to be more flexible, more adaptable when things change.
I see your point.
Okay, so some practical tips for using probabilistic thinking.
Okay, I'm listening.
One is to think in ranges of outcomes rather than like a single point.
Okay.
Instead of saying, I'm going to make $100,000 this year, think, I'm probably going to make between $90,000 and $110,000.
Okay.
But there's a small chance I could make more or less.
So it acknowledges the uncertainty.
Right.
But you can still set goals and plan.
Exactly. Another tip is to get comfortable using, percentages and probabilities.
Instead of just saying, I think this will happen.
Yeah.
Say, I think there's a 70% chance of this happening.
Exactly. It makes your thinking more precise.
Okay, I'm ready to start thinking in probabilities.
Good. The more you practice, the easier it'll become.
Okay, so what other mental models can help us navigate this complex world?
Let's talk about one that can really simplify our decision-making. The power of defaults.
The power of defaults. Okay, tell me more.
A default is simply the pre-selected option, the path of least resistance.
Okay.
It's kind of amazing how much influence it has over our decisions.
Even when we don't realize it.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do defaults actually work in the real world?
Think about organ donation.
Okay.
In some countries, you have to, opt in.
To be a donor.
Right. But in other countries, you're automatically an organ donor.
Unless you opt out.
Exactly. So in one system, the default is not to be a donor, and in the other, the default is to be a donor.
Interesting.
And studies have actually shown that organ donation rates are way higher in those countries where the default is to be a donor.
Wow, that's incredible. So just changing that default can have a huge impact.
It can. It shows the power of inertia.
Our tendency to stick with whatever the status quo is.
Yeah, even if it's not the best choice.
So we're basically lazy decision makers.
Well, I wouldn't say lazy necessarily, but definitely, cognitive efficiency is a thing.
But brains don't like to work too hard.
They don't. They're bombarded with information all the time.
So many choices.
Yeah, so defaults help us simplify all those choices.
And conserve energy.
Exactly.
So defaults are like mental shortcuts, helping us make all those little decisions.
And once you understand this, it's actually pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Because we can design systems with defaults that nudge people towards, better choices.
I like that. So what if the default retirement savings plan was set to a higher contribution rate?
Exactly.
Or what if the default option at fast food restaurants was a healthier meal?
Great examples.
Okay.
Those simple changes to the default could really make a difference.
It makes me think about how defaults are shaping our choices all the time.
They are.
We just don't even realize it.
And once you're aware of it, you can start to use it to your advantage.
In my own life.
In your own life, yeah. Think about your own habits.
My routines.
Are there any defaults you can change?
To help me make better choices.
Exactly.
That's a great question to think about. I have to ponder that one. Speaking of making better choices.
Yeah.
There's one last model I want to unpack.
Okay.
Hanlon's razor.
Ah, yes. Hanlon's razor. Such a good one.
Yeah, good for navigating, all those tricky social situations.
And avoiding conflict.
Exactly. Remind me what it's about.
Okay, it states, never attribute to malice that which is more easily explained by stupidity.
Right. Or incompetence.
Hmm.
Or just a simple mistake.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that not everyone's out to get you.
Because it's so easy to assume the worst.
It is, especially when you're stressed or frustrated.
Oh, I know I've been guilty of that.
Me too.
I catch myself sometimes just spinning these stories in my head.
Oh, yeah.
About why someone did something.
When it's probably a much simpler explanation.
Right. We've all been there.
Exactly. That's where Hanlon's razor comes in.
It's like a reminder to press pause.
Pause, yeah.
Before jumping to those negative conclusions.
And consider a more, benign explanation.
So instead of thinking someone's intentionally trying to annoy me,
yeah,
maybe they're just having a bad day.
Or they didn't think it through.
Or they made a mistake.
Exactly. It's a more generous approach.
It's more compassionate.
Yeah. And it can save you a lot of grief.
It's like choosing to see the best in people.
Yes.
Giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Until proven otherwise.
And it creates a more positive, peaceful environment.
For everyone.
This makes me think about how Hanlon's razor could even be applied to online interactions.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's so easy to misinterpret things in written communication.
Yeah, tone and intent.
Which can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Yeah, and hurt feelings.
Right, so it's important to remember we're all human.
We are.
We all make mistakes.
Yes, we do.
So before sending that angry email.
Or social media posts.
Right. It's good to remember Hanlon's razor.
Maybe they just messed up.
Or maybe they didn't express themselves clearly.
Exactly.
I think we could all use a little more Hanlon's razor in our lives.
A little more grace and understanding.
I agree. This has been an amazing exploration of mental models.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
And I have all these new tools for thinking more clearly, making better decisions.
Good.
But learning about them is just the first step, right?
It is.
The real magic happens when you start using them.
In your everyday life.
Exactly. So to everyone listening, I encourage you, be curious.
Experiment.
And see how these mental models can help you.
Unlock your full potential.
That's it for this deep dive into the world of mental models. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next time.